Moscow, August 19, 1991. Red Army tanks rolled through the capital of the Soviet Union. A group of hardline communists, including Secret Service Chief Kryushkov, had staged a coup against President Mikhail Gorbachev and his reform policies. Boris Yeltsin, Russia's first freely elected president, called on the people to resist. The coup failed. Yeltsin defeated the communist hardliners. The Soviet system collapsed. On December 25, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned, and the Soviet Union was consigned to history. The red flag over the Kremlin was hauled down.
Former conflicts during the Cold War were based on ideologies, whether it was communism or capitalism or third world. The core of the conflict was very ideological, and the sides were quite clear. It was black or white, it was good or bad, depending where you came from and what you believed.
The collapse of the communist system marked the end of the Cold War. Armaments no longer required were destroyed. But what did the end of the Cold War mean for the secret services, for spies in both East and West? What use were they in the new order of things?
It was a massive adjustment. And there was also the fact that in all the jubilation over the downfall of our opponents, the politicians were saying, now the danger's over and we can cut down on the BND, the Federal Intelligence Service.
What would have happened if they disbanded the BND? We'd have had no information basis. The BND's work was not just to do with the evil East, but the whole world.
Capitalism had won. The world was now ruled by money. Globalization characterized the new economic order. There was ruthless competition in every market, and only the fittest would survive. Research and development are expensive. Espionage is often cheaper, and there's a huge market for foreign expertise and good agents.
The members of the KGB, for example, were clearly an elite group in the Soviet Union. Very well educated, fluent in languages, highly qualified people who were looking for new jobs in the field of security.
New jobs for well-trained agents in the economy? Well, industrial know-how was always a profitable end of espionage. In the secret services of some countries, there are newly founded units that specialize in industrial espionage.
Industrial espionage is a daily phenomenon in German enterprises. Both foreign intelligence services and competitors are engaged in trying to obtain the know-how of enterprises based in Germany.
A wind energy farm in northern Germany, the focus of one of the most spectacular cases of hostile competitive spying. A medium-sized firm called Enercon in East Frisia is the most advanced producer of wind turbines. In 1994, Enercon was planning to export its wind turbines to Texas, thereby gaining a foothold in the American market. But instead of getting an order worth millions, Enercon's management received a letter from California and another from the U.S. Department of Commerce. Both accused the German firm of infringing patent rights.
Enercon first thought, this can't be true. We invented this product, so where's the infringement? They can't touch us.
But apparently an American company was claiming patent rights to the wind power technology developed by Enercon.
Alois Woben, the owner of Enercon, happened to discover in the files of the claimant company, thanks to their carelessness, spy photos taken in his own plant. The technology he himself had developed was presented in the court files, which explained what had happened.
Spies from his American competitor Kenetec Wind Power had gained access to an Enercon wind plant in 1994. They photographed all the details that interested them. The E40 wind turbine was technically years ahead of the competition. The plant was a bestseller. Enercon had already sold over 1,650 units. Thanks to the spy photographs, the wind turbine could be reproduced and patented in the US. So, legally speaking, the American concern did own the rights to the technology. A bitter blow for the German firm.
The result was that the German company Enercon lost access to the American market for 10 years. They couldn't take on the 100 extra people they'd planned for and lost a very great deal of money.
But it's not always a case of technology being appropriated, as it were. With the support of former Federal Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, the Transrapid Consortium sold its high-speed train to China. The plans were delivered along with the train, and not long after, the Chinese unveiled their own version.
Für den Fall Transrapid musste natürlich durch die
In the Transrapid case, it was a matter of deciding between economic interests and the risk of know-how drainage.
Risiken durch Know-how-Abfluss. Und diese Entscheidung ist
The
gefallen.
decision was made, and there's no point in complaining later on if it results in know-how drainage.
Zu Know-how-Abflüssen kommen kann.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, as the saying goes. Most firms are aware they must allow the Chinese government unrestricted access to design documents and that their product could well be copied. Those unwilling to comply may lose the chance of making millions.
Neither are politicians interested in banging their fists on the table, as this could damage bilateral relations. And one wants to do business with a country like China, so nothing is said.
The change of course for the Chinese economy, introduced by Deng Xiaoping in 1992, led to an enormous surge in growth.
China is on the way to becoming a world economic power, and is naturally interested in doing this as fast as possible. So it's dependent on the know-how of industrialized countries.
What's important to the Chinese is to catch up technologically, but they know they don't need to reinvent the wheel. They simply copy it. Thanks to the lack of expensive development costs and cheap labor, China has already succeeded in becoming world market leader in certain sectors.
On the Chinese side, there's no sense of wrongdoing about copying technology when it comes to national advantage and creating employment.
In Iran, the national advantage has to do with nuclear technology. The Iranian government is demanding the right to the peaceful use of nuclear energy. The West fears that the real aim is nuclear weapons. Iran is already in possession of a medium-range missile, the Shahab-3, capable of carrying warheads, including nuclear bombs, over a range of 2,000 kilometers. The Iranians were evading the supervision of the International Atomic Energy Authority and illegally obtaining materials and know-how from Pakistan. The West was anxious to prevent this by means of diplomacy and the intelligence services. Vienna. In 2000, a Russian nuclear scientist was on a secret mission for the CIA. His briefcase contained top-secret plans for constructing the detonating mechanism for atomic bombs. The plan was that he should pass these to the Iranians in Vienna in order to sabotage the Iranian atom bomb program. The secret material contained mistakes inserted by the CIA. The Russian expert was aware of this. He was uneasy in his role, feeling that his mission was too transparent. So he decided, on his own account, to point out that there might be some mistakes in order to maintain his credibility as a trader. In this way, Iran had plans for building an atom bomb delivered to its doorstep by the CIA.
Interesting story, and I saw that even the street address where he dropped his package seems to be correct, but whether this is true or not, so far we have not been seeing anything like that.
Ideally, sabotage would be the cleanest, easiest solution to preventing a country from having a nuclear weapons program.
Iran's nuclear facilities are under constant satellite observation. As an atomic power, Iran would decisively alter the power structure in the Middle East. The Israeli intelligence service Mossad, in particular, would not permit a radical Islamic regime to possess nuclear weapons.
I'm quite sure that enough information was collected in past years and recent years to enable effective military programs to be really carried out.
Brussels, a central venue in global competition. Important economic decisions are made here, so it's a profitable target for spies. There may well be many mutual interests in the European Union, but interests tend to differ when it comes to intelligence services. This is dangerous and hampers the EU in its capacity to act.
Le manque de coopération entre les services de renseignement.
The lack of cooperation between European intelligence services creates considerable problems in the economic field. They do work together in the fight against terrorism and against organized crime, as also in nuclear technology transfer, but not in the economic sphere, where they only act in their own national interest.
Bugging, no problem in Brussels, as evidenced in a 2002 bugging scandal. In the conference rooms of the European Council building, the venue for negotiations between the heads of state and government of member countries, experts discovered hidden microphones.
We don't know whether the bugging of 2002 was the last one or just the last to be discovered. The EU has known since at least the end of the 1990s that it's subject to a lot of spying, by allies too. With regard to our relations with America, European politicians have always been under the illusion that these are friendly. But, taking a closer look, you soon realize that since the end of the Cold War, conservative think tanks in the USA have developed another policy, aimed at consolidating American dominance in the 21st century. It's not just Americans who engage in bugging, but the French, British, Russians, within the European Union too. But proving it is very, very difficult.
There's one bugging system that exists quite officially, a relic from the Second World War. It's called Echelon. Used for listening in to the enemy in the Cold War, it's now the world's largest data collection system. And this is how it works. Bugged telephone conversations, intercepted faxes and emails are stored and scanned by supercomputers for certain keywords and subjects. The EU Parliament has long suspected that economic information is also being searched for.
Echelon was a classic technical instrument of political espionage by the West against the East. Why wasn't it closed down? Well, the countries using Echelon are the United States, Britain, New Zealand, Canada, and Australia. They obtain information worldwide via this system electronically, and they exploit it for industrial espionage.
Economic espionage, trade espionage is something that the United States doesn't do, and it has it's not often believed that that is the correct position. When the United States says that it doesn't do economic espionage, it is seldom believed.
What the Americans admit to is listening in when they suspect corruption. That's their excuse.
A state visit by President Mitterrand to Saudi Arabia. The French were keen to do some lucrative business in a market long dominated by the US. But the Americans were able to prevent this. They listened in to the contract discussions, in which there was talk of bribes. The business deal collapsed and the Americans got the order.
The fact that economic espionage goes on between allies is known, but for political reasons not spoken about. In the English-speaking world, this had been quite different for a great many years. It was talked about quite openly. As a legacy of the Cold War, we still have reservations. Friends don't do that sort of thing. We only monitor the East, and that's sadly still with us.
The largest echelon intelligence gathering station is at Menwith Hill in Britain. These huge golf balls can be used to eavesdrop on and evaluate telephone calls, faxes, emails, the full range of electronic internet traffic. Incredible quantities of data. The information is trawled for specific words and voices, and although it's maintained that the trawling is only for terror-related words such as Al-Qaeda, it could well be for wind turbine or Transrapid. The system is said to have over 120 satellite and ground stations around the globe at its disposal and be capable of covering 90% of internet traffic. The information is evaluated by America's National Security Agency. With its 38,000 official employees, the NSA is the world's largest intelligence service. It's here, at NSA headquarters in Fort Meade, that all data are collected and analyzed. New York, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, a symbol of capitalist power. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States became the sole remaining superpower, protected by well-equipped forces and at least 12 intelligence services. The new challenge of international terrorism was certainly recognized, but not yet considered a threat to the country's own security. And then came the shock of September 11, 2001. Islamist terror struck American home territory.
Holy fuck!
Oh my God! Oh my God! Jesus fucking Christ!
I think the American intelligence services didn't take very seriously the threat of Islamic terrorism.
Nobody was really of the view that commercial airliners were going to be commandeered and driven by suicide terrorists into buildings.
I think that's one of the biggest failures, if you will, was the failure of our leadership to not to move more aggressively against a new kind of threat.
The Americans already listened in and recorded conversations between the kidnappers of 11th September months before they crashed their airplanes into the World Trade Center. But the problem was they didn't have enough people speaking Arabic to be able to make sense of these conversations.
The question that should be asked is, did the intelligence community do everything it could to prevent 9/11? And the answer to that is no, it didn't.
And it turned out that the American intelligence services, the FBI, CIA, the military services, the NSA, had not recognized the threat and had not interpreted the information they certainly possessed quickly or accurately enough.
Portland Airport. The perpetrators going through security checks 3 hours before the World Trade Center attack. And information on the Hamburg terror cell provided by a CIA agent was not evaluated at CIA headquarters in Langley.
فاقبلني شهيدا اللهم إني أحتسب نفسي عندك فاقبلني شهيدا.
The White House had to react. 3 days after the terrorist attack, President Bush declared war on international terrorism before Congress.
How will we fight and win this war? We will direct every resource at our command, every means of diplomacy, every tool of intelligence, every instrument of law enforcement, every financial influence, and every necessary weapon of war to the disruption and to the defeat of the global terror network.
The first direct military response to the terror attacks of September 11th, an air raid on Kabul. According to intelligence information, Afghanistan was the center of the Al-Qaeda terror organization and Osama bin Laden's hideout. Bush charged him with responsibility for the attacks and demanded his unconditional extradition. The Predator drone, an unmanned aerial vehicle, was first used in Afghanistan. Bush hunted bin Laden with high-tech weaponry.
There's certainly a danger that intelligence services can increasingly become an instrument of the military. In the USA, for instance, the Pentagon controls 80% of the budget for all intelligence services.
On October 25, 2001, in the federal law called the Patriot Act, Congress granted the President powers for uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism, powers which also encompassed the domestic sphere. The act entailed considerable restrictions on civil rights. The NSA was empowered to undertake a comprehensive listening and surveillance program, an intelligence service with policing tasks. The NSA taps into the central networks of major telephone companies and collects data from over 200 million subscribers. Surveillance is permitted even without any firm suspicion. Filtering programs search international internet traffic for certain keywords, such as bomb. Private emails are also read by the NSA. All the information can be collated and made use of by the investigative authorities.
Ever since September 11, 2001, the American security authorities have been traumatized. They'll use any means, however dubious, to obtain knowledge of terrorist organizations and potential terrorist operations.
Osama bin Laden, the son of a rich Saudi Arabian construction company owner, founded the international terror network Al-Qaeda and is regarded worldwide as the instigator of the terror attacks on the U.S. In Afghanistan, he worked with the fundamentalist Taliban and organized a number of training camps for guerrilla fighters. In the Quran schools, youngsters were taught that faith and struggle were one and the same. Following the successful American military attack on Afghanistan and the Taliban regime, Osama bin Laden escaped to the inaccessible mountainous border area between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And for all the high-tech weaponry, the search for the terrorist leader has so far proved fruitless.
If you know where to look, you can employ technical means. But if the person or the group you're searching for goes undercover and the cover isn't simply the landscape, but also involves people, then it's very difficult indeed.
A major role is played by the Pakistan Intelligence Service, of course. But since many of its members have tried to protect bin Laden and his people because they cooperated with them for many years, there are trust and sympathy involved in these relationships.
In the meantime, the terror phenomenon has become so independent that Osama bin Laden's significance lies not so much in the direction of operations as in his intellectual leadership.
Out of the Arab world's sense of being subordinated to and threatened by the West, Osama bin Laden has succeeded in creating a strategy of demonstrating power. He has become a symbol of the struggle against the infidels. In the eyes of the American government, Al-Qaeda and Islamist terrorism were supported by Saddam Hussein. Bush sought the support of the United Nations for an attack on Iraq. Secretary of State Colin Powell presented the UN Security Council with what was described as confirmed intelligence on the existence in Iraq of weapons of mass destruction.
We have diagrammed what our sources reported about these mobile facilities. Here you see both truck and rail car mounted mobile factories. The description our sources gave us of the technical features required by such facilities are highly detailed and extremely accurate.
Let's look at one.
We now know that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and no support for Al-Qaeda from the Iraqi regime.
I was in charge of a team that was responsible for reviewing all of the U.S. intelligence community's information about connections between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. And we reviewed 10 years of material, around 75,000 pages of information, and found no connection at all.
Saddam Hussein believed he was surrounded by CIA agents who would, of course, know that he neither had weapons of mass destruction nor links with Al-Qaeda. But in fact, there were no CIA agents in Baghdad. At the end of March 2003, the Americans and their allies, the Coalition of the Willing, attacked Iraq. The invasion by American and British troops was accompanied by massive aerial bombing, particularly of the government quarter in Baghdad. Resistance by the Iraqi forces ended after just a month, and the victors occupied the city. The symbol of dictatorship, the huge statue of Saddam Hussein in the center of Baghdad, was pulled down to the jubilation of Iraqi crowds. Speaking on an aircraft carrier, the commander-in-chief of the Allied forces, President George W. Bush, declared the mission fulfilled and Iraq liberated.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
It was an unprovoked invasion of a Muslim country by an infidel power. And so what's happened because of Iraq is bin Laden and Al-Qaeda have moved from being the man and the organization to being a philosophy and a movement, which will now survive Al-Qaeda and bin Laden and thrive for the foreseeable future.
There is still no peace in Iraq. Terror attacks shake the country almost daily. Instead of freedom and democracy, there's anarchy and terror.
The Iraq War is the universal battlefield. Oil on the fires of militant Islamist terrorism.
The terror spread to Europe. Madrid in March 2004. 10 terrorists detonated a series of bombs in suburban trains. 191 people were killed. The trail led to Al-Qaeda. Spain, like Britain, was one of the coalition countries. On the morning of July 7, 2005, London was shaken by 4 explosions. In the middle of the rush hour, suicide bombers detonated their rucksack bombs in 3 underground trains and a double-decker bus. 56 people were killed. Another coordinated attack by radical Islamists. 3 of the 4 terrorists were of Pakistani origin, but born in Britain and British citizens.
We no longer face a threat coming from a single organization. by the name of Al-Qaeda, to the extent that we ever faced such a centrally directed threat. We face a much more diffuse situation now, where sometimes small groups, small networks, or single individuals take it on themselves, without outside help, to act in the spirit of bin Laden's message. That is a much more complex threat than we faced in the past.
In Germany, people felt safe. After all, the country had not taken part in the Iraq War. But in the summer of 2006, suitcase bombs were placed in 2 regional trains. It was only through technical mistakes that an appalling catastrophe was averted. Video recordings made by CCTV cameras at Cologne railway station helped in the search for the perpetrators. The pictures showed 2 dark-haired men going up an escalator to the platform. Their identification and arrest followed. Politicians demanded the expansion of video surveillance and an easing of data protection rules. But the fear of a totally transparent society has mobilized civil rights activists. Data networking, facial recognition and computer-aided search techniques have long made it possible to produce movement profiles for targeted individuals.
As a former East German, when I see what's going on in the Federal Republic in this respect, with surveillance cameras alone, we never had it to this degree. It can't be justified simply on the grounds of combating terrorism.
The main demands made by intelligence services in combating terrorism include the introduction of passports with biometric data, such as body size, iris characteristics, fingerprints, and face and voice recognition, all of which facilitate identification. These characteristics would be converted into digital data and stored in huge data banks. With the aid of computers, every individual could then be clearly identified. So is this transparent citizen to become the reality?
To some extent, this transparency already exists in Germany in many spheres. Just take the whole bonus system, by which companies can check exactly who has bought what, where, when, and how. Is it any wonder if you get the odd unsolicited catalog? If you just take all these data and put them together intelligently to compose a profile, you've already got a virtually transparent citizen.
Everyone now traveling to the US has their fingerprints and iris characteristics registered. The combination of these data gives the security authorities considerable scope for surveillance and pursuit. But all these millions of collected data have to be intelligently evaluated, preferably using software capable of independently analyzing large quantities of data and recognizing complex links. This is what the security organs want. In Germany, for instance, software like this is being developed by the firm of Ontos.
Simply looking at data is of no use. I need to collate them logically and intelligently in order to recognize what they actually contain. Individual data are no use on their own. We look for the connections between particular elements. For instance, the relationship between 2 people or 2 companies, the relationship between a person and a company, and so on. We can't establish these connections from any individual document. We need mass data in order to recognize the information contained in them.
Mass data, a flood of information, are interlinked. Starting from an initial suspicion, for example, of Arab students who have relatives in the US and who receive money transfers from dubious organizations. Investigations can lead to concrete evidence. A software solution also suitable for the German government's planned anti-terror data bank.
It has a very specific purpose, not exchanging all information, but doing everything to contribute to early recognition of an imminent attack. So, we need to comprehend the structures that can lead to this danger, to be able to think ourselves into them, to really understand them. This can be done with human and technical sources. So, intelligence services and the police work together. Their tasks and their departments remain separate, but in one specific area they work together.
Even so, video surveillance, computer surveillance, and data networking are not enough on their own. Well-trained agents need to be infiltrated into suspect circles.
I need agents in the ambience of terrorist cells who speak the same language, look the same, and live in the same way. It may be difficult, but the fact that it's difficult shouldn't stop us from doing it.
But in the world of radical Islamists, the intelligence services find themselves at the limit of normal infiltration methods. The Federal Intelligence Service, the BND, has to work out new strategies.
Das Gewinnen von Quellen in
Acquiring sources in terrorist structures is extraordinarily difficult because you can't do anything with money. They want to go to paradise, not to get rich. You can't achieve anything with pressure or with threats. The bonds within a group and within the terrorist structure are generally very close. There are tribal and family bonds, and the bonds of undertaking missions together. So it's a real problem finding anyone prepared to work with a Western intelligence service.
The actions of American secret services are sanctioned by special laws. It's another matter with covert CIA operations abroad. Investigation of the CIA's rendition flights by a special appointee of the European Council have revealed that over 100 people kidnapped on suspicion of terrorism have been illegally transported via Europe and taken to prisons in countries where torture is permitted. Human rights organizations are still reporting flight movements that are not recorded in official records.
And this particular flight flew from Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, where we know at exactly that moment detainees were being released. It flew to a remote civilian airport in northeastern Poland, then to a military airport in Romania, then to Morocco, and finally to Guantanamo. So clearly a prisoner flight, and hardly a direct route or a route that could be explained by refueling. Prisoners were being picked up and dropped off.
From 2002, suspected members of Al-Qaeda were taken to the Guantanamo prison camp, where they were denied both civil rights and rights as prisoners of war.
Was die CIA-Flüge betrifft.
The CIA flights are clearly a violation of human rights. No question about it. There's no way they can be approved of. A violation, too, because of the kidnapping. And what also disturbs me is the brazen way it's happening on European territory.
Standards of international law are being disregarded, and above all, human rights violated. Suspected terrorists may be traced and caught using advanced technology, but getting on their trail often involves large sums in head money. The Jordanian top terrorist Musab al-Sarkawi led the Al-Qaeda network in Iraq. The Sunni hardliner topped the wanted list of extremists sought by the U.S. intelligence services and their allies, with a price on his head of $25 million.
By precise analysis of the landscape in a video, the Jordanian intelligence service succeeded in more or less pinpointing Sarkawi's location.
As you observe the target here, there was a flight of 2 F-16s from the United States Air Force. They have now been told where the target is. They have identified it. The lead aircraft is going to engage it here momentarily with a 500-pound bomb. on the target.
The situation is unclear and very dangerous. An unbalanced war utterly determines suicide bombers against technically highly equipped elite forces. Intelligence experts warn of placing too much trust in new technology.
What's decisive is the human source, the only way to obtain real information. Unfortunately, this has been pushed into the background a bit. We've been so fascinated by what technology can do that we wondered what we needed people for. They're only put in danger by their work. But I must say this very clearly. People are vital.
Ultimately, what you want to know is what motivates individuals, what moves them, how they think. And that needs a human element.
Politicians very often think that if they invest enough money in new intelligence technologies, satellites, computers, listening devices, echelon, and so on, they can combat terrorism better. And I think that is completely wrong. At the end of the day, it's not the machines, it's human beings who do the work. Intelligence work starts and ends with human beings.